So welcome back. This is Victoria Day, and I'm with Corri, Flaker, Fraser. And if you're just tuning in, this is Women's Issues, Women's Voices on KOPN Columbia. And tonight we are doing our monthly show that airs on the last Monday of each month. We call it the Goddess Hour, where we explore archetypes of the divine feminine. And if you've been with us, our last few shows have been about Kwan Yin, and we have now, this first half hour, spent moving, transitioning between talking about Kwan Yin, calling in her energy, exploring those stories, to the stories of Kali, and how we can see that they're sisters, that they're sisters. And so something that's really important for Corri and I is that this is not just a show where we sit here for an hour and we say, here's what we think. We are sharing our thoughts, our ideas. However, we also love to hear from you. You can write us at WIWV@kopn.org. Put in the subject line, put the Goddess Hour, put Kali, put one of our names. You can also go on to our Facebook group, Women's Issues, Women's Voices, and post something there about that we were prompted. But to help you consider some of your own ideas, Corri's going to ask some questions.
Yeah, some questions to help you expand your perceptual lens a little bit of what Kali is, and also how you also your own patterns and patterning. So I'm going to ask these questions and leave a few seconds in between just so you can catch up with what I've just said and just let it sink in a little bit. How often do you live in overwhelm? Do you notice when you're overwhelmed? And when you do notice, if you notice, how do you deal with it? Do you find yourself stuck in anger when you're feeling overwhelmed? And could that anger be a message for you that it's time to slow down or tend to something that you've been ignoring in your own body or your own joyful life? I believe that our bodies really tell us when we're doing too much. Sometimes our brain, like we start to forget things, or sometimes we have digestive issues that are keeping us up at night. And other times our heart is just racing. Disease can be caused in our body when we push ourselves too hard to
perpetually, right? Yeah.
Perpetually push ourselves too hard and not take time out to care for ourselves and plan what would be best for our own nurturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And
like we've said earlier in the show, society asks us to expand, but rarely offers to give support.
Right. Yeah. And this goes back to what we said about the Kwan Yin. And if we're not tending ourselves, if we have the capacity to tend ourselves, then we can actually support those in our society who, if friends, neighbors, of folks, strangers, right, that have not yet learned that capacity. But if we aren't learning it for ourselves, then we don't actually have the capacity then to support those who haven't yet learned how to support themselves. And sometimes, I mean, like it's, I mean, as we talk about in here, I mean, due to racism, homophobia, abuse, rape, misogyny, ageism, sizeism, like all of the ways that our abuse culture depletes people's, um, depletes people. I mean, how do how do how do we as feminists, how can we look at the archetype of Kali and recognize that it's just so interesting to me that our culture focuses so much on her as the destructor and the fear that comes up. But if you take the time to read the stories, Kali doesn't start there. She's like the lake we talked about at the beginning. She is the nurturer. And then she gets pushed and pushed. And it's when she, like, there was one line that I saw that I wrote down, like, Kali will not be controlled by the arrogance of men. And this was one of those that I read that they were using the word men both to mean males, but also humanity. I don't usually use it both ways, but that's how I read it. Like that she will not be controlled by the arrogance of men. And that, like, so for me, right, from an embodiment perspective, I the phrase that keeps coming up for me is that I talk to, I learned it for myself. I talk to my clients and other people about, you know, thermostat or thermometer. This is one of the things that you know, I've learned. Someone taught me through play therapy. Like, if you're the parent, it's your responsibility to be the thermostat because your kiddos do not have the capacity. They're the thermometer. They get really excited about something, and you know, and then, and it might be something wonderful, but then they get overwhelmed, and if you get overwhelmed with them, then you're all overwhelmed. It's like the destruction of the lake, right, over its borders, and things get destroyed.
So when you're talking about you
Mm-hmm.
being the thermostat, are you embodying Kali and also being a thermostat? Because I almost feel
Oh,
like
yeah. Well, so
Kali really busts that thermostat.
the thing is that she busts it to deal with demons, right? She doesn't bust it like when you see that. So the story, the way I've read the story is, I mean, that, you know, she and Shiva have a loving relationship, but you wouldn't see that from this picture where she's standing on him,
Right.
right?
Yeah, and he looks dead.
Everyone's dead because the demons are attacking, and she comes in to fight the demons, and she gets so in that her nervous system, you know, this is the embodiment piece, the somatic piece, like her nervous system is so into fight, which is really helpful when you're like trying to protect yourself, your family, right? Except that she doesn't, one of the things that happens is that she sees Shiva then as dangerous, and she's actually trying to beat the life out of him. And then she realizes that it's Shiva, and that's when she starts to calm herself down, right? And to
Okay.
return back to her nurturing great mother. And
Yeah. And she was triggered. It wasn't, she was triggered by something,
well, right, yeah, by the demons, by the,
which,
yeah,
yeah, she was triggered by the demons,
right. So,
which is what we all have sometimes.
right, yeah. But, and so for me, it's that, so when I'm talking about being the thermostat, it's like, so for me, this, what I take away from Kali is that there are times in which I want the natural part of my nervous system to go into fight. If, and I think of there's a program through the university called RAD, Rape Aggression Defense, and that's one of the things that they teach in this. Is one of the pieces of self-defense is not simply like, you don't, it's not to beat up somebody, right? So
Right.
you cannot just be walking down the street and someone looks at you in a way that you find upsetting and you go into your defending yourself mode, right? That's where you're aware and you tend to your own system. Oh, and this is because somatically, anger and empowerment feel similar in the body. And anger can happen without going into fight mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without going into destructive mode. But we don't really have a culture that, and this is where it comes back to Kali for me. Like, and I'm not Hindu, I've never visited India, but what I read is that when they talk about Kali, they are able to see that she is a deity. I'll go back to that reading I did, that has many sides, many parts. And one of those parts is anger at injustice that has now taken her into her nervous system, into fight, and she will destroy. But this is not her set point, right? Kind of like the lake.
Right.
Its set point was 16
Yeah.
acres, and it was willing to
Yeah.
keep expanding, right? But it needed to expand and continued to be tended. The container needed to be tended. And so it was asked to expand, and then it was left to deal with it all on its own. And I feel like that's what we have in our culture. It's happening for a lot of people, right?
Yeah. And we're supposed to do it with a smile on our face,
And be pleasant, right?
be pleasant, not angry,
Right?
agreeable, compliant.
Yeah. And that, so okay. And there is a way to be angry, but if you, and I've talked to activist friends of mine, that what happens is if you are angry and speaking calmly and you're not listened to, and you get more and more, right? And you get to the point that you're like screaming for help, right?
Yeah.
That's the arrogance of men that line was talking about, right?
Yeah. Then
Yeah,
they'll only hear you being angry.
right.
They won't hear
And then
anything else until you're really angry.
they'll blame you for being destructive, when
Hmm.
it was like, well, like the blaming the lake. The lake was not destructive. The lake was being the lake, and Kali is nature. And so that's that piece, is how do we be both our human selves, right? And call on our Kwan Yin selves, tend ourselves, and also still stand up for injustice without destroying ourselves in the process, which is what concerns,
Yeah.
because it's Kali is, Shiva and Kali are part of the same divine, right? I know listeners can't see my arms, but like, this is the other pieces. These are mythological pieces of the divine spectrum. And so if, as Kali is destroying Shiva, she's destroying herself. Yeah. Yeah. So with this last minute,
Sometimes self sometimes destruction is necessary in order to be heard and to for others to start thinking that way too. But
which is
Also,
unfortunate.
I mean, and also there are ways to do it in a healthful way when as you tend to yourself and
I think that
keep yourself healthy and
that
not worn out.
unfortunately destruction is necessary in an out of balanced situation. And that's
True.
what we have, whether
Yeah.
it's, global warming, the destruction of nature because things are out of balance,
Yeah.
or the destruction, systems, right, because they're out of balance. Right? Yeah. Well, so listeners,
Thanks
we're
thanks again.
yeah, we would love to hear any comments or thoughts or stories. We'd love to hear from anyone who actually,
Yeah.
someone who has, like, their life, because of their family, Kali is a part of their faith path. We would love to hear from you. Doesn't have to be just our voices.
It's always fun to
Yeah,
hear
yeah, yes.
other people's stories.
So, and we hope you join us in next month, at the last Monday of the month, when we will spend the time exploring more about the different parts of Kali.
Yeah, we'll really get into all aspects of Kali next time.
And we're going to go out with a little bit of music called Dances of Kali. Thank you so much for listening. You're listening
Thank
to
you.
89.5 KOPN Columbia.